One of the most frustrating things about the international financial crisis of recent times is just how few people saw it coming and just how many of them claim they did. Actually, if you look back at their track records, many of the pundits, the commentators, even the big financial bodies, very few of them actually put out a report in advance to let us know what was on the way. That's an alarming thing, actually. Professor Roy Batchelor, Professor of Banking and Finance here at Cass Business School, has been investigating why. I asked him for the reason.
Well, I think the first thing to say is people have, let's say, exaggerated hopes for what economists and economic forecasters can achieve. This isn't the first time that we've missed recessions. About 10 years ago, the IMF published a very interesting study which said that really of all the major recessions that had occurred in the post-war period, we had missed them all, essentially. So, the question then is, why, are we doing our job really badly, or, what is the difficulty?
With hindsight, the clues were there.
Well, with hindsight, you can always explain what has happened. I mean, every day's newspaper is full of a long story about why the financial markets did whatever they did yesterday, but somehow no one can see these things coming. And I think the same is true of our recessions. These are quite rare events. They happen, maybe once a decade? They're all different. In the mid-70s it was oil prices, in the early 80s it was tight monetary policy, in the early 90s it was loss of consumer confidence or the Gulf War or something. 2000 it was the collapse of the internet bubble. So I think always we're trying to catch up. We generally retool our models so that we could have forecast the previous crisis, but in the run-up to this one, nobody, who knew the whole banking system would seize up? This key variable, the gap between LIBOR and the T-bill yield, I mean, it's something that had remained unchanged for decades, and suddenly it sprung apart, destroyed, credit creation, and just basically threw the financial system into a gridlock. So I am making excuses here, and the excuse is every recession's different. In hindsight, we understand why they happen. A few people did correctly predict them, but of course, they're the sort of people who predicted a recession every year leading up to 2008. So, you can't always go with the pessimists.
Those few people, of course, did not include the UK's finance ministry, the Treasury. What is the Treasury's long-term track record in forecasting?
Right. Well, the long-term track record of the Treasury actually is very good. The best way to forecast, we've discovered just through empirical research over the past 30 years, best way to forecast, if you want accuracy, is just to take 30 forecasts by city economists, average them and use the averages. It doesn't sound very scientific, but it works. In the same way as, if you want to have a low volatility set of shares, you diversify over a number of different types of company. Same thing works with economic forecasters. You put some monetarists together with the Keynesians, together with the supply side as the crazy people, average them, and you get a low risk outcome. Now the Treasury is nearly as good as that, which is pretty good over the long term, not in every year. I mean, they've had, I think, 2 failures in 30 years of forecasting or something, and possibly heading for 3.
But if that's the best way of doing it, wouldn't it be simpler just to take long-term forecasting away from the Treasury?
Well, the problem is that along with the forecasts of, say, GNP and inflation and, the sort of headline numbers, you need something that tells you really what a policymaker should do. So you need to link from the GDP forecast and the inflation forecast to fiscal policy and the deficit and all the fine print of the sort of 101 macro variables that the government has to monitor and control. So you need a model. And really, you can think of what the Treasury model has been doing is it's been based on these headline forecasts. It's been making sure everything else adds up across and down. So you do need some kind of structure like that. Okay, for a good basic headline figure, you can take these consensus forecasts. But if you want to use it for managing the economy, you need a tractable model. You need something that translates the numbers into tax rates and expenditure decisions and so on.
So if there was one thing the government could do that really would make things better, one piece of advice you could give the government, what would it be?
I think, I think what matters for budgetary planning in a way is the long-term forecast. And so I think, if the job of the new government is to introduce more credibility than there was in the last budget, we don't have to tighten now. This is why Gordon Brown went wrong in 2004-05 when the economy was roaring ahead, and instead of saying this is an unusually good year, we're way above trend, let's scoot back some taxes, he said, no, this is due to my genius in raising the trend rate of growth. This is a normal year. And of course that left us with insufficient tax revenues when the real recession hit. So I think you need to know where your long-term trend is, and that lets you know when you should be tightening, as now, and when you should be loosening.
Professor Roy Batchelor, thank you very much.